Estimados y estimadas participantes en la sala.
Ladies and gentlemen, and those that are connected virtually with us, I would like to welcome you all to this seminar. As ambassador to Uruguay from Switzerland, I'm very thankful that the 8th regional platform for disaster risk reduction is held here in Punta del Este. And I'm even more grateful that despite the beautiful beaches and restaurants, you have decided to participate in this seminar on this very important topic. Early warning to reduce loss and damage, connecting communities through technology. Thank you very much for participating in this event. Switzerland is committed to reducing disaster risks as a result of the adoption of the Hyogo framework in 2005. As many other delegations, Switzerland has actively participated in the negotiations on the Sendai framework 2015-2030, and it also embraces the global platform that is held every 4 years in Geneva. The Swiss Agency for Cooperation and COSUR organized this event in partnership with their regional offices in the Andean and Central America region to share 3 specific examples on how early warning systems and early action can help reduce loss and damage caused by disasters and the effects of climate change. We will listen to experts on how science and technology are helping connect communities among themselves and with the disaster risk management systems in the different countries. It is my honor to introduce you to the participants. Mr. Roberto Mendez, professor of San Simón University in Cochabamba, Bolivia, who will be leading the session, and Nicole Clot, coordinator of the regional program on disaster risk reduction and rapid response, and COSUDE deputy director in Peru. She will give some welcoming remarks and set the stage for this event. It's my honor to welcome you all and to give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Estimados y estimadas participantes en la
Dear
sala,
participants in this room and those that have joined us remotely, it is my honor as Deputy Director of COSUDE Peru and Regional Coordinator for Disaster Risk Reduction and Rapid Response to welcome you all to this COSUDE event on early warning to reduce loss and damage. At the last UNFCCC conference of the parties on COP27 in Egypt, loss and damage has received the necessary attention that many countries and communities that suffer climate changes have been requesting for many years. However, we should not only focus on loss and damage caused by disasters, but now we need to move for reactive action to proactive action. In this framework, UNDRR requested member states to support zero climate disaster for 2030 increasing the frequency and intensity of climate-related events. Therefore, it is necessary to reduce vulnerability and the exposure to these type of hazards so that they do not become disasters leading to losses and damage. One of the steps defined by the United Nations to achieve this goal is to establish multi-hazard early warning systems and inclusive systems until 2027, because the combination with anticipatory action is one of the most effective tools to reduce mortality and the economic losses caused by disasters. Despite the significant progress made in the implementation of the Sendai framework over the past 8 years, we have not reached the ideal situation where we should be. For example, we have not attained the goal of reducing the number of people affected by disasters, let alone even it has increased in 80%. Also, the midterm review of the Sendai framework stresses these key messages associated to early warning systems, mobilizing resources, technologies, and capabilities to implement and extend the scope of early warning systems. Multi-hazard early warning systems is still limited. To date, only 95 countries have reported the existence of multi-hazard early warning systems. This is a very low coverage of the global population. I call upon the multi-hazard early warning systems in this region, Latin American and the Caribbean, is the lowest at a global level. In this event, we will learn about different ways on how science and technology, including homemade implementations, all the way to very complex implementations, help bridge this gap, emphasizing the role of the communities that must be at the core of early warning systems and that actually suffer the impacts of these disasters. With early warning systems and anticipatory action, we can intervene before the occurrence of an event and actually not only in climate-related events like floodings, as we mentioned in the first example, but also in geological disasters like earthquakes that were mentioned in the second example. And we will share an experience showing the combination of anticipatory actions and early warning systems for geological and hydrometeorological hazards. In this regard, I have the honor of introducing our panel members. Alicia Cleraza, Regional Director for Latin America from Practical Action, Luis Alonso Amaya, General Director of Civil Protection from El Salvador, Luis Iván Gerón, Program Management on Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change, Llevamos Mejor Guatemala, an association in Guatemala, and Guadalupe Martinez, representative of the pro tempore chair of Peru before CAPRADE. Those that are not in this panel or in this regional platform are the people actually affected on a daily basis by the disasters. Therefore, we would like to give them the floor through the following video to reach all the communities.
Los altos niveles de riesgo en las Américas y el Caribe demandan diversas estrategias de preparación y respuesta que involucran a actores de todos los niveles. La alerta temprana y la acción anticipatoria salvan vidas y bienes, por tanto, son una contribución importante para reducir las pérdidas y los daños.
Informamos si ha habido lluvias, la intensidad de la lluvia, el nivel que acumuló el pluviómetro, y también ahora estamos agregando el clima, ¿no? Si el cielo está despejado. Sirvió para estar alertas, para poder comunicarnos entre nosotros, y al mismo tiempo tenemos también la obligación como miembros de la red de monitoreo informar a las organizaciones en el caso que haya una cuestión ya de alerta, digamos, ¿no? Prácticamente ya nos está reconociendo como parte de su red de información, porque la característica del CENAMI es que da datos a nivel general, de distrito o de provincia, pero nosotros damos datos prácticamente cada 2 kilómetros, 5 kilómetros, de acuerdo a la distancia en donde está colocados los pluviómetros, y eso hace que la información sea mucho más minuciosa, ¿no? Más concreta.
Hemos podido establecer controles de calidad muy estrictos de los datos que se generan en el campo y llegan a los centros de registro. Y también hemos podido afinar los programas de cómputo que automáticamente determinan la ubicación y la magnitud de un terremoto. Con esto hemos logrado reducir los tiempos que requieren estos programas para declarar una alerta. Son muchos los desafíos que hay que enfrentar. El principal, a mi juicio, es el de crear en la población la suficiente confianza en el sistema como para que no permita la duda al momento de recibir una alerta. El reto está en operar y mantener un sistema robusto con un mínimo número de falsas alertas. Y eso requiere de una alta inversión, tanto en instrumentación de gran calidad y durabilidad, como en una capacitación constante del personal encargado de las redes sismológicas.
La ciencia y la tecnología deben facilitar la conexión entre las personas y los sistemas nacionales de protección civil y gestión del riesgo, reconociendo que las personas están en el centro de los sistemas de alerta temprana.
Estamos trabajando respecto a lo que es la evacuación del volcán. Tuvimos una experiencia inolvidable respecto a desastres. Había un grupo de personas trabajando casi a las faldas del volcán. El volcán estaba tirando mucha ceniza. Entonces ellos, a través de una llamada telefónica, se comunicaron con el administrador. Entonces nos comunicamos así y fue de esa forma que ya pusimos en práctica el plan de evacuación y nos dirigimos al lado de arriba. De hecho, acá está un rótulo de señalización que dice ruta de evacuación. Nosotros contamos con un plan de evacuación por desastres del volcán, pero lo pusimos en práctica realmente ese día.
Los sistemas de alerta temprana contribuyen a articular los lazos de colaboración entre las comunidades de prácticas, de reducción del riesgo de desastres y cambio climático, uniendo capacidades y fondos en ciencia y tecnología al servicio de las comunidades en riesgo.
Sirve para que la gente tome conciencia y empiece a ser ellos mismos los actores de las soluciones a sus problemas.
Themselves the actors of the solutions. In this case, everything that is related to disaster prevention and reduction.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning. So we do have the ideal, let's call it ideal, inputs to bring these three elements together: science and technology, early warning systems, and loss and damage. Three elements that involve disasters. Let's share now three experiences related to these three elements. In the past sessions, the messages basically said, all these things are very complex. How do we bring communities together that suffer the impacts and the effects of climate change? And well, we have heard the voices of the communities, and now we will share the experience of these three programs. What are the possible paths through early warning systems, and try to respond these questions. First of all, I would like to give the floor to Alicia. Alicia, this that seems very complex. She will be able to show us that early warning systems are actually the mechanism to become closer to the community in order for better adequacy and also for timely anticipatory action. Please, the floor is yours. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Ciencia, tecnología. Ahí está.
Science and technology. In Peru, in May, October last year, the glacier lagoon was overflowed twice, affecting the Yokongate community, causing economic loss and damage, and non-economic loss and damage. Each family lost approximately $2,000 due to the reduction of alpaca textiles, due to the reduction of the farming areas. They lost at least 15 alpaca animals per family. So this is the lagoon. This lagoon didn't exist. It's a new glacier lagoon resulting from the global warming, and nobody compensated the loss or made any type of compensation to this community, and there was no way to prevent this damage. Now, instead of glaciers, we have glacier lagoons. The Institute for Glacier Research identified 3,000 new glacier lagoons. This is an example of a lagoon that belongs to the Ilcanota Basin since 2006 to 2017. Glacier lagoons, in addition of other disasters like floodings. The correlation may be quite straightforward. There are other researching programs, and we know that we won't be able to mitigate climate change, and communities will not be able to respond on time. We could have reduced the loss to a certain extent. Well, we've been discussing different models and approaches towards repair to those communities that are more vulnerable to climate change. But we do also have anticipatory action. What do we mean by anticipatory action? If you can help me with that. So this is anticipatory action, is what we can do in terms of investments, organization, during the time frame between the issuance of a warning and before the occurrence and the impact, whether we are talking about landslide or floods, etc. For example, the purchase of water purification kits is an example before the event. So anticipatory action allows us to optimize humanitarian aid that will be necessary due to unavoidable losses and damage due to climate change. Anticipatory action allows to save lives, property, and allows communities to recover faster. So with a technical support, I don't know.
This is the reason why we rely on the technical and financial support of SDC and the Zurich SETA Association, and that's how we are able to implement this system in the Andes through the Red Cross, among other organizations. We've been able to implement this anticipatory action system both in Peru, Bolivia, and also in Ecuador. We're focusing on floodings at the moment, but we also have a multi-risk approach. In order for anticipatory actions to be successful, we need the active participation of citizens. And we're aware that communities start participating when they start believing and trusting the system. That's when we see participation levels going up. So how do we achieve this engagement and this trust that we expect from communities? I'm sure you've seen this before in the video. This is citizen science. This is a rain collector that is homemade that approximately 60 first responders have used in this basin. We've also used it in Cusco and in Bolivia. These brigade members or first responders have been able to measure the course of the river. Let's see if I can find a picture I'm looking for. Here they are. Yes, you can see them on screen. So they've been able to measure the rainfall volumes with this instrument, and by using WhatsApp, so we have these two tools, right? So through WhatsApp, they've been able to share information on these warnings. They've been able to share information among themselves as well as their local authorities. What we've been able to experience through this is that citizen science allows us to achieve this anticipatory action through these homemade tools. Finally, citizen engagement is also able to come to place through free engagement through these tools. We're able to use these tools through members of the community. We have a few examples of these climate stations with Raspberry Pi microprocessors. These pieces are created through 3D printing. We also have these LIDAR stations that are developed through Imperial College that have been installed in Rio Canote in Peru and also in Bolivia. These measure the volumes, the levels of the river, and this works as an early warning for flooding. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alicia. I think that you touched upon two examples that are very relevant. On the one hand, how anticipatory action enables help improving humanitarian aid. I think this is a key element that we need to provide our people with. In addition, this also enables a faster recovery. If anticipatory action is created, then the recovery, as you mentioned, will also be faster and more efficient. Finally, you mentioned this dialogue between science and technology. Academic science and technology with citizens science and technology. This has shown that the communities profit from this because they can generate, communicate, and create information. This goes from the brigade teams to the citizens themselves. This also helps the lawmakers and those who make decisions to reach better decisions as well. Thank you, Alicia, for your participation. I'm sure many of you have questions, and we will be taking some questions through Slido. You can use the code that you see on screen and go to slido.com, and you'll be able to enter your questions. For those of you following online, on the right side of your screen, you'll see a red button that you will be able to click on in order to access Slido. And that way you'll also be able to see the questions that that you can share with us as well. All right. We will now move on to our second panelist. We have Luis. This is an early warning system for earthquakes. This is a regional program. Luis will be sharing with us how these very few seconds that we gain through early warning systems for earthquakes are vital in saving lives. This is something that has come up very often in the past. We've always talked about the cost and how this is a strategic program in order to improve the cost efficiency of early warning systems. Luis, you have the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. Good afternoon to everyone present today, and thank you, Roberto, for chairing this discussion. Before we start talking about early warning systems, which are related to geological events, I would like to share with you an experience that with regards to an event that took place in El Salvador on November 8th, 2009. We had a big flooding because of Ida storm, the tropical storm. This thalweg, or overflowing of the river, left us with 350 millimeters of flooding, of rainfall. In El Salvador, we usually have 16 or 1,800 millimeters of rainfall, having 400,000 in 3 to 4 hours. It's really a critical situation for our country. This led to losses and damages, and we also lost lives, unfortunately. There's a specific district called San Pedro Mazahuat, and I'd like to share some stories about this district. This district suffered terrible losses, except for human losses, so no lives were lost. And what was the reason behind this? How could this happen in this district? The reason why there were no lives lost in this district was an early warning system that enabled them to gain this warning beforehand and to find refuge beforehand, and also to request humanitarian aid. So we can see through this example that the early warning systems are core in order to save lives. We know that earthquakes are one of the most complex hazards, and it is usually very difficult to predict and forecast earthquakes. However, we should not be defeated by this reality. But all of us who work in risk forecasting, we need to see this as a challenge, not as a threat or disappointment. So we need to focus on thinking that every single day, our early warning systems have to become more robust, and they have to be aligned with what, for example, this doctor in Costa Rica was presenting earlier. We need to be able to empower our population by giving them these critical seconds, this extra time that will enable them to evacuate that area, and in order to give the warning to the rest of the community as well. When this earthquake sets off, and there is no previous warning, then at least we need to be able to give them extra seconds so they can find a safe space, a vital space. This happened, for example, on the earthquake that took place on January 13th, 2001 and 13th of February in El Salvador. At the time, we had several devices that were activated through the oscillation of the earthquake, and these devices created this very sharp noise. It's interesting because we got these devices a year before, in 2000. We remember them being very costly, and unfortunately, not everyone had access to these very expensive devices. There's a AA battery in this equipment. Many people are still considering whether these devices were useful or not at the time, but we can come to the conclusion that this was an early warning system instrument that many could have used at the time. Is it worth investing in these early warning system devices for geological events? Well, I believe it is worth it. I believe we should do it. I believe it is worth to keep investing in these, or to start investing perhaps, in any kind of process that will allow us to provide our population with a second chance to live. Thank you. Thank you so much, Luis. You have shared a very interesting example, how these very few seconds that you mentioned, that might make the difference between reacting or not reacting. It is important to find the justification to these investments that will, at the end of the day, save lives. I think that that should be our main goal. And of course, it is important to draw attention to training and providing the training that the community needs in order to understand this. These earthquake systems sound quite complex, but as long as we are hitting this target of saving lives, then all these investments are worth having. We will now move on to a different system, an early warning system. We have our other Luis here. We have early warning systems for volcanoes. Luis will be sharing the scientific and technological aspects of this and how these are very powerful tools in order to transform and share knowledge with our people. Go ahead, Luis. You have the floor. Thank you so much, Roberto. Well, to begin with, I would like to say that Guatemala is one of the countries with the highest active volcanoes in Central America, and I dare to say Latin America. There are three main volcanoes, Volcán de Fuego, Volcán Pacaya, and Volcán Centellito. This last one is one of the most dangerous ones at a national level, and also at an international level. It has been classified as the most hazardous in Latin America. In the surroundings of these volcanoes, we have 700,000 families who have their livelihood placed in this area. In previous years, this has been an experience that came up time and time again, and we've been able to identify that one of the main line of actions is to foster capabilities and trainings at every single level, institutionally, at a community level as well. We always need to focus on these four pillars of early warning systems. That we can see the purple circles in the middle of the slide. So we need to focus on what we're facing at the moment, what we will be focusing in the future. Thirdly, we need to be able to communicate what are the change patterns that we are monitoring. And then lastly, we need to have an effective response at every single level, not just community level, but also we need an effective response of how to issue a warning and communicate it to the people. Probably many will say, well, these are the most hazardous volcanoes. Centellito is a very young volcano. It's only 100 years old, and its energy will keep going. Like we like to say in Guatemala. We need to be very acquainted with this type of volcanoes. When we conduct this monitoring process, then we really rely on science. We need to be able to coordinate all the knowledge that science provides. And that's why we have approached certain institutions like Polytechnic schools in Zurich and institutions in Mexico, because they have early warning systems that are very developed and they're also deeply connected to our TAC project. They're providing scientific and technical support to our program. So, of course, scientists need to process all this information and create data. And as you can see, we have created multimeter stations, digital models that have been able to be developed through drones. We have several technicians working on this, and they can create information that will help forecasts in the future. So our scientists are producing this information and communicating to the rest of the scientific community. So if these volcanoes are so dangerous, then why do we have communities living around them? Well, because the soil around it is the richest kind of soil. Because of the new minerals and the nutrients that are created, that are found there thanks to the type of soil around volcanoes. However, through the early warning systems, the multi-hazard early warning systems, we've been able to detect other hazardous materials. In particular, when we are facing this change in rainfall and we have volcanic deposit at the bed, at the foot of the volcano, that's why we need different stations like climate station, earthquake station, and sound stations. And these stations have been designed by the staff in our program, but also we've had the support of the civil protection groups as well as the people living there. So we want our communication to flow from the institutional so the institutional members of the team are communicating with the community and also with the scientists. We really focus on this because we want our message to arrive to every single participant of the system. I'm sure that there will be lots of aspects of this system that we yet do not know, but we need to keep practicing, we need to keep working towards improving these early warning systems. Lastly, you can see these images. We see the drones through our phones. We can access these drones. We can monitor different volcanoes. We have municipal technicians that use different apps that also help monitor climate changes. We have scientists being trained in Mexico and other countries as well. Well, thank you so much. So multi-hazard early warning systems are important, as well as building capacities at every level with our authorities, the academia, as well as our community. We also need to convey this information. And this is what creates trust in every party involved. Given the type of hazards that are faced through this warning system, this links the at-risk communities as well as those communities affected by climate change. So we've heard from 3 different experiences with early warning systems in order to provide answers through science and technology, risk reduction, and as well as providing improvements for our community. We're now going to move on to questions that we are getting from Slido. Of course, we don't have much time left, and we have just a few questions for, so it's just a few minutes for some questions. Hopefully, our panelists will be able to answer these questions. We will take turns. The first question is, how does this information issued by the citizen are linked to the early warning systems? So what I'm trying to say is, how does the community get this information? How can this be aligned with what your teams are doing? Well, in terms of the Rimac Basin in Lima, Peru, as well as in Bolivia, we are working to coordinate the brigades together with the emergency centers. So they use these rain meter collectors in order to capture all this information and share the data through WhatsApp. So in those cases, our brigade members, as well as the citizens using these rain collectors, can interchange or share this information in order to detect whether there is certain consistency among them. This is not necessarily consistent data, because the origin of this data is different from the different sources we get them for. But this enables both brigades and local authorities to take action and create these warnings. Thank you, Alicia. When it comes to El Salvador, I'd like to share with you that the warning system direction in El Salvador have created this observatory team. So it's important for us to create this dialogue, this communication between the parties. And that's why this network of local observation consists in a group of people that have been trained by this institution, but who are also connected to civil members of the community, both at a communal level as well as national level. This network enables us to assess how efficient these mathematical systems are acting in order to consider whether there's going to be an overflowing of a river. And these local observations enables us to consider whether the increase of rainfall will create more higher volume in the river. So those living at the sides of the river can confirm how exact, how accurate these data are, and whether our forecasts are accurate or not as well. After creating this data and corroborating its accuracy, then we can consider forecasts that will tell us how many families, for example, will need to be evacuated, how many shelters we will need to house them, and how much humanitarian aid will be required, potentially, in order to meet immediate needs of these people.
Let me give you an example about the community at the community level. In climate change, this is very interesting because, as Luis mentioned, we have a community climate observer program, and they collect data and then we turn them into statistics and charts, etc. But scientists know about this. We know about the changes in patterns and variability, but what about the community? We can understand different charts, but for the people in the community, this is not very visible or understandable. But I don't know if that happens in your countries, but in Guatemala, we have health centers at community levels. And we do have, for example, height patterns. So to know the size and the weight of the different children. But when we asked this to the community, only the women understand these different charts because men don't take their children to these health centers. So the idea is that when rains exceed historical records in 30 years, we are talking about climate change. And that is something that they can understand, that they can realize that something is going on, that is exceeding the type of rain they are used to. So we need to use what we have in the community. And this is about communication. Communication, how do we do the communication? Technicians have a hard time in translating these data into the community. The same applies to volcanoes. People live in volcano communities. There are volcano eruptions every day. There are eruptions every day. Is there anything changed? So if there are 2 or 3 eruptions, well, of course, technicians do have more information, but we need to make this information available to the community in a way that is understandable to them. I'm going to tie 2 questions here that are connected to what you have just shared. How can we elect the community members that will become responsible for collecting the information at the community level? What type of training do they get? And in connection to Luis' comments, what happens with communities that do not have any telecommunication service coverage? So how do they receive information? Alicia? The different communications have different social fabric. So it depends on the existing organization. If, for example, we do have community leaders already involved in community risks, and depending on how well organized the communities are, we can identify community leaders faster or rescue leaders faster. But we have experience in places where the social organization is not very well organized, or in other areas which are more organized. When you have this social fabric, well, people are willing to get organized and they want to become leaders. So it is up to the community itself. It's not about us choosing the leaders, but the community itself elects its own leaders. Luis, what happens in the case of no communication service? What do you do at a community level? And how do we keep the same level of effectiveness, and how do we receive the information? Well, this is quite complex. We were discussing this recently with SINMUDE and CONRED people. There are sectors that do not have access to telecommunication services, that they do not have coverage. 98% of the country does have telecommunication coverage. Now, the second step is that we can enter into some partnership agreements with the telco companies and communicate data at a certain time close to volcano areas or more exposed areas, in order to have text message communication or other type of communication. It is a little bit complex, but the advantage here is not to market, but to focus on the fact that when we are faced with disasters, these communications turned into humanitarian aid. For example, there was a volcano eruption that caused millions of losses. So when we talk about telecommunication, we can do some prevention. So there is less investment in disaster care than in telecommunication investment. Corporate social responsibility is perhaps the right path to move forward. 30 seconds. Very, very, very quickly, one of the things that we have seen throughout the pandemic, water, electricity, internet are considered basic services for all economic types of activities in the different communities, in the different villages. So we need to promote access to internet. But in those areas where there is no coverage, there is a loudspeaker system in place, and we use that as a second option or a backup option. So, sorry, we do have some questions, but the next question is, at what level in each of your countries takes place the coordination of the different warning systems, and what are the main challenges that you face in this regard? Well, first of all, let me say that early warning systems, regardless of their purpose, hydrological or meteorological disasters, they all have vital components. First of all, generation of scientific information that leads to the second stage, which is the warning. The procedure that should allow us to warn the population about the immediate occurrence of an event or the materialization of an event. And the third component is a system, a color-coded system or any other type of instrument that allows the population to understand the level of risk to which the population is exposed and how that risk is increasing, and build together with them a step-by-step process so that all the people in the community should know and follow in the case of a warning. This includes, for example, the alarm. Alicia mentioned, for example, the loudspeaker system. What happens with communities that have no electricity and the loudspeaker system is not operational? So at what level does this take place? Let me give you a specific example about Salvador. And I believe that in Central America is the reality for all the rest countries. Early warning systems implied having institutions that have robust systems to generate information. For example, the Threat Observatory in Salvador, in Guatemala is IBUME, INETER, etc. OSICORI, or other type of institutions that provide robust information. So what are the other institutions involved? Civil protection, civil defense, or whatever the name. They should also be involved. Why? Because in most countries, they have territorial presence, and civil protection, civil defense should also provide training and should also put together the different regional, municipal, departmental, and community plans. A very, very important element, and in my opinion, the most important one, is the community. To the extent we engage the community, to the extent they develop capabilities, that they believe that the early warning systems belong to them, will absolutely save their lives. Thank you very much. We are short of time. Thank you all panel members, and I will ask Guadalupe Caprade to wrap up this session. And Guadalupe will also share with us a general overview of the Andean region and the relationship with the early warning systems. Thank you. Thank you to you all. The Andean countries have ratified their commitment to reducing the vulnerability of communities and livelihood in the event of disasters. In this regard, the Andean Strategy for Disaster Risk Management and the Implementation Plan by 2030 is a regional purpose by strengthening shared knowledge. Against this framework, we put together different experiences regarding early warning systems of the Andean countries that provide significant progress in each of the 4 member countries. This report shows that early warning systems are part of the public policy for disaster risk management. And in the implementation of early warning system, there is a combination of science, technology, and local knowledge and easy access mechanisms, as we have already seen today in the experiences shared by our colleagues from Salvador and Guatemala, and also other experiences that use different affordable devices that provide examples of Andean country examples. Bolivia has an integrated information and warning system for disaster risk management that designs a risk map of the most recurrent events: drought, freezing, and other types of events. And this is applicable in 335 mechanisms. There is also an early warning system that is at a 3 national level to adjust to climate variability. Colombia has strengthened monitoring networks and early warning systems at the 3 government levels, with a significant reduction in loss mortality rates, moving to 5.9 to down to 4.1. And it has a large monitoring network of hydrological phenomena with many stations, 8 radars that provides mechanisms for responding. There is a tsunami alert warning system, tropical cyclone alert system, and seismological observatories. In Ecuador, we would like to highlight volcano early warning systems in 2 volcanoes, Cotopaxi and Tungurahua, in the Inter-Andean region and Central region, and early warning systems for tsunami and the Galapagos and the coastline, or for hydrometeorological hazards. In the case of Peru, Peru has strengthened knowledge management, monitoring, and territorial articulation through early warning network that are part of the experiences that we have shared today, that Alicia has shared today. And as part of this national early warning network, there are 245 early warning systems, 17 are multi-hazard. Peru is currently, or will implement by 2026, rainfall, seismic, tsunami, and volcano activity and glacier hazard early warning systems. There is a combination between the early warning systems and the community. And in the 4 Andean countries, this is approached differently. Bolivia has constant contact or monitoring to feed in risk maps and provide land planning. Colombia has projected the development of 19 pilots of community warning systems with an approach that allowed us to know the performance of the communities, their traditional knowledge, and integrate these in the early warning systems. Ecuador will make official this year different guidelines for national early warning systems in the case of multi-hazards. And it's important to highlight the guidelines because they must be focused on people with the understanding of the technological and mechanical part of early warning systems and the role of citizenship and of institutions so that these systems can save lives. Peru will include in the national platform all the early warning promotion systems so that they can become multi-hazard warning systems, reaching faraway communities and combining widely coverage systems with local knowledge. So in this climate change context, and to wrap up, with unpredictable events in terms of frequency and intensity, in addition to geological disasters, early warning systems allow to reduce loss and damage and strengthen the resilience of community. It's a means of articulation between disaster risk management and climate change, which sometimes go in parallel, particularly when we talk about public management. The countries of the Andean community want to strengthen people-centered early warning systems. For example, expanding the coverage, the role of the citizens, and the recognition or acknowledgement of local knowledge. Thank you, Guadalupe. A round of applause. So we have shared 3 experiences in Central America, an overview of the Andean region in South America, and I will ask Nicole to really wrap up this session. In a couple of minutes, In this event, we would like to underscore the relevance of early warning systems and anticipatory action centered in people, and with a focus on inclusive multi-hazard early warning systems. With science and technology, we deliver important services, including all 4 components. When we talk about early warning systems, including all 4 components, we must always take into account surveillance and alert, service, promotion, disclosure, communication, and response capability, risk knowledge, monitoring, and warning systems. Service. We are convinced that we need to break silos between disaster risk reduction and climate change and bring together capabilities and funds in science and technology at the service of the communities that are at risk in order to increase and enhance their resilience. And let me conclude and invite you for lunch at the Monte Carlo room, where we can continue the discussion. Thank you very much.